Hello, hello, Matt the Lesser here, and we are finally back with another episode of our Terra Mystica Fan Factions Basic Strategy series. This is the first of these videos that you've come upon. We are going through the new 14 fan factions that are currently in testing on Board Game Arena and soon to be released as an official expansion for our favorite board game, Terra Mystica, and talking about some tips and tricks for how to play some of these factions. So these videos are for you if you are familiar with the game of Terra Mystica, you know the rules, you know the mechanics, you've played at least a few games, and you're looking to maybe play your first game or two with this new expansion, whether on Board Game Arena or maybe this a little bit in the future, and you have those beautiful physical boards in front of you and you're breaking them out for the first time. We've done a number of these already. This is episode 11, and we today are going to dive into one of the strongest, but also one of the trickiest and most complicated of the new fan factions, that being the Treasurers. The Treasurers have a mechanic that is quite unique in Terra Mystica, and it's taken me a little while to play enough games with them to feel comfortable creating this video, but I think we're finally there, and we're really seeing the Treasurers start to shine through in some of the games that have been played on Board Game Arena. So we're going to talk about, hopefully, how you can be successful with them as well. I don't do video editing. I don't have animations. So this is the no frills, one take, Terra Mystica Fan Factions Basic Strategy overview of the Treasurers. All right, let's go. So first thing you notice when you look at the Treasurers board is they are a red faction. For those who have played a lot of games of base level Terra Mystica know that red is one of the trickiest colors from a map perspective, and also just a very kind of weak positioning in general, but luckily the Treasurers are plenty strong and make up for that with no issues. When we look at the Treasurers production down here, we see something that we've seen in a number of other fan factions. The Treasurers have a bunch of holes in their production. These holes are really meant to offset what would sort of otherwise be too strong of an economic engine for the Treasurers. And so for factions in general, and particularly this is true for the Treasurers, so they've got a couple holes, dwellings, no worker production in the third and fifth dwelling. They also do not have a base worker production. They also have something that I think is only for them, a hole in their TP track. Their second TP doesn't produce anything. And then they also have, this is not a hole, but their second temple, instead of producing a priest, produces 4 power, which is less than the engineer's 5 power. So I'm not exactly sure where the designers came up with this particular one, but that's a little bit different as well. Normal sanctuary, and then the stronghold is a 4 power stronghold, so that nice higher production stronghold that we see with some other factions. Look up here at the power bowls. They also again have a unique setup here where they have 4 power in bowl 1 and 8 power in bowl 2, which is barely but meaningfully stronger than the sort of more standard 5-7, because this means that the Treasurers, even without getting a power, maybe if they're in first seat, can take a power action right out the gate, a 4 power action, so not double spade, but all of the other ones right out the gate if they want to. It's a big if, because as we will see when we get into the Treasurer's ability. But normal starting resources for the Treasurers: 4 workers, 15 coins, another double fire. We have a number of factions now that start with double fire, which is one of my qualms with this expansion in general. I think they're too concentrated on some of the cults, but double fire can be very useful for the Treasurers. Normal dig upgrades, normal ship upgrades, and then we look at the book ability, which honestly maybe more than any other faction is defines the Treasurers, right? And that's quite a claim. Of all of Terra Mystica, I think this book ability might actually be like the most important one for any single faction. So what this book ability does is the Treasurers have something called a safe. And what the safe is, and it's I think if you're playing it in person, you would literally put the resources on this area of your board. When you gain resources via income, so that's what the little hand symbol is. So any production resources that you get from your left side of your board here, or income favor tiles, or income off of bonus tiles. So like technically the 6 coins, for example, that you get off the 6 coin bonus tile is income, so that counts toward this as well. Any of those resources that you gain at the beginning of a round can be placed into the safe, and you do not have access to them for the round. They just sit there. But at the beginning of the next round, you get them out double. So if you put, for example, 2 workers and 4 coins in at the beginning of round 2, at the beginning of round 3. You don't have those resources for round 2, but at the beginning of round 3, you will get back 4 workers and 8 coins. So this is an economic engine unlike anything else that we see in Terra Mystica, because you're actually better off putting things in the safe than you are building, right? If you build, for example, you build an extra dwelling and you're going to get a worker next round. Instead of using that worker to build the dwelling, you could put it in the safe and you would get back 2 workers, but you also didn't have to spend the coins or find a spade or have access to the hex. You just get it. Now, of course, this can depress their early board presence a little bit. And the way the treasures game ends up going, and because of sort of the slow roll of this safe engine, is that the game feels very, very backloaded. In round 1, they often do very little, and in round 6, it almost feels like they're playing 2 rounds because they literally have 2 rounds worth of resources, because you don't put anything in the safe at the beginning of round 6 because it's the last round. So in round 6, you get your stuff out of the safe from the previous round, plus your normal production, and you have all of that. So round 6 is always big for the treasurers. But this safe just generates so many resources, and it's one of the reasons that they have these holes of production, because otherwise there would just be too much stuff funneling into the safe. You'll notice that the icon on the stronghold here is also very similar, and so the stronghold ability complements the safe ability and says that instead of just income being able to go into the safe, once you've built the stronghold, you can put any resources newly gained at any time. So resources you get from a power action, resources you get from a town, even resources that you get from a power conversion from your bowls, which I think is personally like the bridge too far. I would rather see them change that, and maybe they will. But for now, any of these things, like you can convert a power into a coin, throw that coin after you've built the stronghold, throw it into the safe, and then at the beginning of the next round, you get it back as 2 coins. Like, that's crazy strong. Cult rewards too, also. Once you've built the stronghold, cult rewards can be doubled, and they double immediately because technically you're getting them right at the end of the round. So then you're getting them back at the beginning of the next round, which is right away. So this safe mechanism is absolutely the defining thing about the treasurers, and controls everything about how they play, and is just really, really good. And you're going to generate a ton of resources, but they are all going to be delayed, so they definitely roll out a bit slowly. And if the treasurers have one weakness or vulnerability, it's missing out on things while they're waiting for their resources to come in a little bit later. Okay, so that's the treasurer's board. Let's talk, and the abilities, which is everything, but let's talk about, so what does this mean? How does it play? And first of all, when do we want to actually play them? So start with colors, as we always do. Color wheel is important. Maybe actually a little bit less important than some factions, because as we'll see, the treasurers often advance. They're digging late in the game, and they're kind of able to just go with whatever territory is left available to them. But like all factions, but particularly other red factions, they do really like it if their hexes don't get stolen, their home color hexes. And so yellow is the faction that most wants other red hexes on base map, which is what we focus on in this series. So I would say yellow is the one faction you'd probably want to avoid as the treasurers. Any other colors are really fine. Blue is particularly nice. We mentioned it before when we talked about the architects that red and blue have some nice neighboring spots on base map. And so if there's any color that you'd want to see in the game, it's blue, but I don't think there's, any one in particular that, like, it's not like you really need blue in the game. Whereas when you're playing yellow, for example, on base map, you really want to see blue in the game. It's not nearly as crucial for the treasurers. When we look at the bonus tiles, what you want with the treasurers is big income tiles. 4 coins, 6 coins, and the big building tile, which gives 2 workers. And those are so beautiful because you can get those, you can put all or most of that stuff into your safe, and you get it back double. If you get that 6 coin tile, you put all 6 of those coins in your safe, and next round you get back 12 coins. I mean, that's just amazing. Or getting 2 workers off that big building tile and being able to throw them in early and get back 4 right away. Also, the treasurers often like to get at least 1 big building up early so they can score that tile. Again, really, really, really nice. There's nothing that I would say is particularly bad for them. Maybe the absence of like the big tiles. If you didn't see 6 coin, if you came into a game and there was no 6 coin tile and no big building tile, that would make me a lot more hesitant to play the treasurers, because you're not going to be able to feed that safe nearly as well. But the one tile I have highlighted here on the bad is worker power, because power is the one resource that the treasurers do not store. Right? They store workers, coins, and priests. You don't store power. Power just cycles in bowls like normal. And so this tile only provides you one worker to throw into the safe, which is kind of on the weak side and not even any points. The other scoring tiles I would say are kind of neither good nor bad for the treasures because you probably use them on average about the same as the other factions. They don't have a ton of income, so they don't help with the safe that much, but the treasurers do usually by round 5 and round 6 particularly have a bunch of stuff built out, and so they will be able to score them. So dwelling scoring tile, TP scoring tile, ship scoring tile, all fine, not amazing, not bad. If they're there, great. If they're not, that's also totally okay. And then when we look at the round scoring tiles, what you want with the treasurers as much as possible, although they can play a variety of different setups and really be fine, but the higher scoring the track in the late game, the better for the treasurers. So what you really want to see here for the treasurers is dwelling and TP scoring in some combination, ideally one of each so that you're not back to back in round 4, round 5, round 6. Round 4 spades is also great. What you don't want to see are the big building tiles that you can't score as much. And the reason for this is the treasurers, again, remember, this game is going to be very backloaded with all of the resources. And so you have the ability to hit a round 5 dwelling or TP round or a round 6 dwelling or TP round really, really hard. Like, I have seen people build 6 or 7 TPs in a round 6 TP round with the treasurers because of how many resources you're able to stack up, because you just don't have to build stuff to get production, and then you want to build it when you're going to score. Like, that's the whole point of how you play the treasurers. But you need to do that late in the game. If you have a big building or a temple round, round 5 or round 6, you're just limited in how many of those buildings you can actually build in that round. Like, big buildings, you only have 2 in the game. Temples, you're probably only going to build 2, maximum 3, and then you'd be foregoing building them earlier for income favor tiles, which are really nice for the treasures. So, like, that's what you really don't want to see in the late game. On the flip side, you are happy, although, again, not as crucial, but happy to see those earlier in the game, because you know, you can open with a temple or a big building. You often will build a big building in round 2 or round 3. So if those are there, you can score those that much better. I have here on the big building, I've purposefully used the fire reward big building. It is, some factions don't really care which reward between the two. They care more about the scoring type. But with treasures, a fire reward really is quite a bit better because they start with 2 steps on fire. They often are competitive on the fire track, and especially if they build their stronghold, that particular cult reward can pay back actually quite a lot of workers because that tile incents you to build your stronghold, after which all of your cult rewards are essentially doubled. So say, for example, you built your stronghold in round 3, you also got a priest of fire and you're at like 6 steps on fire. That's 6 workers you're going to get back from that cult reward. That's pretty damn strong. So that's a nice thing to see. On the bad side, the one thing you don't want to see, I'd say particularly, is dwelling scoring in the first couple rounds, mainly because that means they're not going to be in the later rounds. Treasurers are not going to expand a lot, particularly in rounds 1 and round 2. Starting in round 3, they often have the ability to build out via some shipping or advancing their digging, and particularly into round 4. But those first 2 rounds, your footprint is almost assuredly going to be quite small. So that's when you don't want to waste those dwelling scorings, or really TP scorings either, but I'd say dwelling scoring even more important. Similarly with towns, I could have put that in round 1 too. Other factions often are able to get a town in round 2, or particularly in round 3. The treasurers, probably not. Their first, if you're sort of playing their economy efficiently, the first round you can really probably expect to have a good shot at a town would be round 4, and round 5, round 6 would probably be better, although other factions will hit those very well too. Like, honestly, treasurers would be perfectly happy with no town scoring in the game at all. They don't often build 3 towns. Sometimes they can, but they often just don't need to. They're better off just optimizing their scoring on the scoring track. And so if there's no towns in the game, town rounds in the game at all, that's like totally fine with them. Okay, so that's sort of the overview of when to play the treasurers. High scoring track late in the game, and just optimize your game around that TP scoring round, that dwelling scoring round, and you're going to be in great shape. What you really don't want is having none of those tiles late in the game, because then you just don't have an opportunity to find enough points. Treasurers don't have any inherent scoring, so they do need it from the track. Okay, let's talk about the math. Fairly standard red stuff on base map for the treasurers here. Put the star on D4 because that's a hex that I would almost always start of. It's central. It's going to give leech. It has some town potential, especially if gray is not in the game. And or even green, and it's a good place to expand from as well. Where your second dwelling goes is going to depend a little bit on neighbors and actually like whether you want to be next to them or not. So treasures sometimes, because they expand so slowly, they don't want to be put into a spot where they kind of can't get the hexes that they want. But also at the same time, their starting hexes maybe matter less than they do for other factions, because they may not care about building a town off of their initial hexes as much as other factions, because they can kind of just ship and go all over or dig in weird directions, because by the time that they're actually really looking to expand in like round 4, particularly round 5 and round 6, they've got a ton of resources and have a whole bunch of different options, and you don't even know where all the other factions are going to be at that point, so you kind of just have to be opportunistic. So D7 is probably the second default that I would choose if I don't have any particular reason to go anywhere else. Just more likely to have neighbors, gives you some decent town options with C5 or even D8 up here through A12 or D6. D6 might be the one you would go for if for some reason you were worried about losing it. I say particularly if like green or yellow is in the game, or those are factions that often want that hex. So you might want to go there, because especially if your other one's over on D4, if you lose D6, your connection gets a little bit dicey. Treasurers are a big network faction. They're going to build a ton of structures by the end of the game, so you definitely don't want to get cut off from connecting. So if D6 is going to make that easier, maybe even at the potential risk of D7, that's an option. G2 can work too. This is another spot that picks up a lot of leech and gives you some access to the south and the west over here. And then even E3, especially if like blue and if you have blue and no yellow, E3 can be a good spot. Or even just starting over here by yourself is not the end of the world. The treasurers, like, they don't need leech terribly. Like, certainly they're happy and they'll take it, but they're not as reliant on it as some other factions. And building one expensive TP early in the game to get up your stronghold or a second temple is like, it's actually totally fine with them, especially if there are big coin tiles in the game that you've been able to bank. Treasurers often find themselves taking like the 6 coin tile in round 1 or round 2, therefore banking a ton. And so there's a couple rounds in the mid game where they actually have way more coins than they know how to use. They will eventually use them by the end of the game, but they have this influx. And so if you have to build an expensive TP or two, it's not like you're going to starve yourself like a lot of factions would. So I wouldn't be as worried about placing away from everyone. And if you do it, it also means that you're more likely to be able to get the area around that hex for a town later on in the game. Okay. So that's the map. Pretty standard. I guess one thing I'll note before we move on here, because it'll come up on the next slide too, is that treasurers, like all red factions, love this stretch through the middle of D4, E7, E8. So E7 is a super important hex. But treasurers also want to put as much stuff in the safe as possible. And so sometimes you have this trade-off of expanding versus the safe. And treasurers, maybe even more than other red factions, like, it's a good hex. If you can get it, that's great. Sometimes you want to optimize for choosing it, but it's not the end of the world if you don't get it. And I would not sacrifice huge economy, especially because of the snowball of the treasurers, to take that hex or any hex in particular. But I have seen people be very successful with that. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about openings. So treasurers have what might be seen by some people as some very boring openings. And the reason for that is that they are going to have less resources than other factions in round 1. So you start with 4 workers and 15 coins. That is not income, so you're going to have those resources in round 1. Okay, great. All other factions, or most other factions, produce 2 workers that they will, or most other factions produce 3 workers, but the treasurers produce 2 workers of income at the beginning of round 1. So you have the ability as the treasurers to take those, or you can put them in the safe. You almost always want to put them in the safe. And if you do that, you will be left with 4 workers and 15 coins, and that's it. You also probably will want to put any income from a bonus tile, which ideally your best choices are one of these big coin tiles or the big building tile. You also probably want to put those in the safe. So you're only going to have 4 and 15, which basically leads you to a lot of treasurers openings that look like build a temple and that's it. And maybe you take a power action, maybe you take a priest, send it to a cult, maybe you take more resources. but that's it, because you don't even need to take a spade. You don't have any workers to build dwellings beyond the temple. And you're better off just banking all that stuff and having more income coming in round 2. And so that's kind of what I would say is actually the most standard opening, which feels really boring, but it's like build a temple. With that temple, take an income favored tile. Income favored tiles are amazing for treasurers because they pay back almost double, right? So you're going to, say you take Fire 1, right? You're going to get those 3 coins at the beginning of round 2 and every round subsequently, but at the beginning of round 2, you can put those in the safe and they're coming back. And so you're getting actually 6 coins off of every round of production of that favorite tile, except for round 6 when you have to just take the coins. But so you're getting a ton more coins off that favorite tile than any other faction would. So Fire 1 or Earth 2 are really the key favorite tiles for the treasurers. Earth 2, if you think you're going to need workers later in the game, particularly maybe if you're going for an earlier dig advance. Fire 1, I would say, is sort of the more default, or if you think, particularly if you think you're going to advance shipping in the mid game to do some of your initial expansion. That's kind of the basic opening for the treasures. Now, other options in the middle are temple plus a dwelling. This is if you do really want to go for E7. And I think that the best times to do this are if you can get your hands on the spade bonus tile, and or if like green is in the game, because they're the faction that otherwise most wants that E7 hex, and you sit ahead of them, because you start with 4 power in bowl 1 and 8 power in bowl 2, you have immediate access to single spade, so you can single spade that hex if you sit ahead of green. And that stretch is very good. You get a lot of leech, guarantees your connection, is a nice town spot. So if you can do that as a treasurers, it might be worth doing, particularly maybe if like one of these other bigger tiles are not available. Maybe there's no 6 coin tile in the game. The person in 4th seat took the big building tile, and you can get the spade. It's like, okay, go ahead, take that. You're still throwing those 2 coins in the safe, by the way, from the spade tile. Definitely do that. But remember, if you want to do this, if you want to build an extra dwelling, that means you're only banking 1 worker in the safe, which is fine. Keep the worker so you can build the dwelling. But then you're going to bank 1 worker in the safe and keep 1 worker out so you can build a temple, again, income favored tile, and then build the 1 dwelling. And that worker will pay itself back eventually. But I would really only do that if you need to secure a key hex, because you're basically sacrificing that worker, that extra free worker that you would get off the safe to build that dwelling. So unless you need to build the dwelling that round and have the ability to and want to on the hex, then I would put it in the safe. And then the final option is to open with Stronghold. This is obviously makes the most sense if there's Stronghold scoring, particularly as we already discussed this fire reward Stronghold scoring. And the math on this one actually works out pretty nicely, because the Stronghold scoring, given that you start with the 1 step on fire, if you build that Stronghold, it already pays you back 1 worker. So at least one of the workers that you have to keep out of the safe, you're making up immediately. And you can make it up even more so if you can get a power action after you build the Stronghold. So to build the Stronghold, you have to hold back 2 workers out of the safe so that you have 6. So you can build TP and Stronghold. You would still want to put in the 2 workers from the big building tile if you're able to get your hands on that. More reason to build the Stronghold, by the way, for the points. Or if you get like the 6 coin tile, throw those in the safe, but keep back your 2 workers. So then you have enough workers to build it. But if you can build the Stronghold and then afterwards get either the workers action or the coins action, the Stronghold ability, now that you have it up, allows you to throw those into the safe too. And so that's actually a really strong way to open as well, particularly if you're going to score the Stronghold. It's a little riskier because those power actions might be gone. But if you can pull it off, it can also be a really, really strong economic opening. The other interesting thing to do potentially with the Stronghold is to take the priest action, because if you can get that priest and throw it to fire, and again, if it's the fire cult reward, this is really the only time I would say doing this, if it's this particular cult reward, you will then get another, that priest basically becomes 2 workers that you'll get back immediately for round 2, which is, again, very, very good. The whole point here is just trying to build up as many resources as quickly as possible using this safe mechanism. Okay, so that's what a treasurer's opening looks like. And so as we go through the game, let's talk about sort of what to keep in mind for the rest of the time. So I've kind of said this before, but I'm going to re-emphasize it. Your default mechanism with the treasurers should be to bank resources in your save. The only time that you should not be putting resources in the save is if you have an immediate specific need in that round and you know exactly how you're going to use the resources and it's valuable either to secure a key hex or later in the game. Sometimes there's some trade-offs of like building something so that you score it in the round where you have the opportunity to do so. Like if you need to hold back one extra worker to build your 4th TP in a TP scoring round in round 5 when round 6 is the dwelling round, like pull it back, score it, because by that point you're optimized for points. But especially early in the game, default should be to bank everything unless you like really need a hex. The resource actually where I think this is like the trade-offs are most tricky to figure out sometimes are actually the priests, because the priests may be more important to keep so that you can advance your digging or advance your shipping, because it will actually allow you to do expansion. And so priests are probably the thing that you will most commonly hold back. The other thing is if you bank all of your priests and you build, for example, like a sanctuary and a temple pretty early in the game, you actually can run out of them. So keep that in mind too when you're thinking about the priests. But like the workers and coins, you should almost always be banking them. Mentioned the income favors, but they're really, really good. Definitely take one if you build a temple in round 1, either Fire 1 or Earth 2. I would not take Air 2 as the treasurers because you can't bank the power. It's just way worse for them than those other 2 favor tiles. You probably will want a scoring favor in the mid-game. So like maybe when you build your sanctuary or if you build a second temple, take its scoring favor, dwelling scoring, TP scoring, Earth 1, Water 1, that is. But I would definitely start with income favor. And if you happen to like build, you know, there's a pretty common line, temple round 1 if that's it, and then maybe round 2 is big building scoring tile, and you build a sanctuary, don't be afraid to build both income favor. Like that stuff is gonna spiral, especially if there's a lot of late game track scoring and maybe a lot of scoring bonus tiles in the game. You will find ways to optimize for those resources, and you're gonna get so many of them. Then maybe build a second temple after your temple sanctuary, and then a second temple at some point later for scoring favor. Like that works too, but like take those income favors. Don't fret over towns. That's a big thing about treasurers. I think maybe even more so than other factions, as I said, just like find the rounds where you're going to score stuff, get your red hexes, build them, and optimize for that late round TP round is probably the thing I love most with the treasurers. Get a copy of Water 1 and build 5, 6. Honestly, I've even seen 7 TPs in a round 6 TP round. Like that is way more points than the towns. The other thing with the towns is that treasures have so many resources they can often advance their digging, and in round 6 they're going to have all these resources, and they can just kind of dig around like wherever they happen to be. If that means doing a triple dig or 2 or a few double digs to find your town space to build 1 town, it's fine. You'll do it. It's not a big issue, and they have the resources to do it. The economy is so big that it's really about how are you optimizing converting this economy into scoring. I have won a treasurer's game with no towns, and I've seen many treasurers games won with only 1 town. It's just not something that they need to rely on if there's a high scoring track. If it's a low scoring track and you're playing the treasurers anyways, then maybe the towns are a little bit more important because you need to find more ways to get points. As you're going through the game, the one thing with the treasurers, especially early, I mentioned this before, you're going to have a lower footprint. You are vulnerable to people taking your hexes, cutting you off. So be really vigilant about that. A lot of it can be alleviated by being smart with your starting hexes and your method of expansion. So one thing to think about is you build a temple in round 1 in many games as the treasurers. You get a priest. You probably want to bank that first priest. So that means in round 2 you have no priest, but in round 3 you have 2 priests when those first priests come back out of the safe. That is when you often will do your first expansion. You can either use those 2 priests to advance your digging, maybe if it's a digging round, or maybe if you have some area in your hexes, or you could use them to advance shipping. Hopefully you've also banked a bunch of coins by that point, so you have the coins to advance that digging or shipping. Maybe you keep the priest from the round 2 production, the round 3 production, so you actually have 3 priests, you can advance your ship to 3, or maybe you get temp ship, but then you can kind of spray out around there. But like monitor sort of where other people are going and make sure, okay, I gotta advance my ship to 3 in this round so I can grab this hex so I don't get cut off, right? Those kind of things. Also think about the income holes, especially in the mid game where it's like, should I build the second TP in this TP scoring round, or should I wait for the next TP scoring round? Don't make sure you don't invest resources into a TP that's not going to produce you anything, especially if you can score it better or the same later in the game. And then finally, the treasurers have this ability, as of the timing of this video, I'm honestly hoping that they change it, but as of the time of this video, they have this ability that when they down convert, so convert a power to a coin, move a power from bowl 3 to bowl 1 to get a coin, they can put it in the safe and convert 2 coins. This means that sometimes you might convert even when another faction wouldn't, because of the extra resources that it's going to generate. So particularly at the end of the round, right before you pass, normally you would only convert down enough such that your income is going to get you back up to basically just below being full in bowl 3. For the treasurers, you might actually want to convert more than that, so that you have more resources into next round, because anything you convert and put in the safe right now, you're getting back immediately. That's why the stronghold is so good. And also, if you need more workers, don't be afraid to do 3 power to a worker and throw it in the safe, because it's effectively being 3 power to 2 workers for next round. So that's a conversion that is totally reasonable for the treasurers to do, in addition to power for coins. It just kind of depends on which resource you're producing more or less of, based on your favorite tiles and your bonus tiles and stuff like that. Overall, this faction is really strong. We've seen them win a lot of games, and particularly if they get their snowball rolling, they can really blow some games out of the water. If you're playing against them, try to identify what some of the key hexes are or some of the key bonus tiles and keep them away from them. If you can slow them down just a little bit early, you can really nip their snowball and they can have a hard time taking off. But they're really flexible, and if they get that economy going, it can be really hard to stop them, especially in a game with a high scoring track. Their network potential is very high. So like, if you're playing the treasurers, again, make sure you get connected and build out 15 or 16 structures, and you should score a strong there. Cults, they're kind of in the middle. They can send priests to cults early. They build a lot of they'll build a lot of structures, which means building a couple temples, so maybe they can be competitive. Maybe they should be more like medium minus on cults, but I've seen treasurers have good cult games too, particularly if they somehow get like the 2 key town or something. They shouldn't really, for the most part, but every once in a while you see some crazy stuff. So, but anyways, have fun with these guys. They're really hard to wrap your head around. Figuring out when to bank, which is almost always, but when to not bank maybe is the trickier thing. If like really optimizing them, there are going to be those 2 or 3 points where you want to pull stuff back and use it immediately for some strategic purpose. But they're really fun. So go enjoy, see how they go. Come find me on BGA, or let me know how your games with the treasures are going in the comments. And we'll be back. There are 3 videos left. I'm going to try to get them all done this month. It's August right now when I'm filming this. I'm going to try to get them done this month, and we'll finish out this series, and that'll be that. So sorry for the long delay. It's been a busy summer, but hope everyone is back, and really looking forward to upcoming Terra Mystica. So get excited for that as well. All right, see y'all later.